All right, so this is going to be episode 4 to UA Year 1. So with that being said, let's just roll the intro.
The bad bitch, like she average. I'm a savage, no hoe, what you want do? I'm about cash, if the raw fast, I'ma get that little nigga by any means.
All right, before we get into the episode, for my new subscribers, it has been a while since I have done an episode to UA Year 1, so a lot of my new subscribers don't know what this series is. I'll have a link in the description to episode 1 where you could see and know what the series is about. The synopsis will be in the description of the first episode, and yeah, I'll have like a community post on my YouTube to show or make a playlist of the different episodes, since so far there's only 3, not counting this video or this part. So yeah, in our last episode we just got done with the kind of creation of the power leveling club, as well as the first day of school, I believe. So yes, also we just got done with the basically, what's it called, the kind of choosing of the representative of the class. So yeah, so our story would start off around, it would be in the morning. This would be the second day of school, but this is a little bit before school starts. Apollo had just, been eating his breakfast, and he's at the table and he's watching a little bit of TV, and he sees on the television that there's this news report, and this news report is reporting on this kind of protest that's happening, and this protest is about quirk awareness. And what they're doing is that they're kind of promoting or making aware that people who have quirks should be treated the same as those that don't have quirks. Because if you don't know, there was a lot of quirk discrimination at this time. So they're basically doing that. And there is a prominent figure here, and that prominent figure that's in the rally is actually the number 1 hero. If I remember right, his name was Fuyuki Midoriya, otherwise known as Frostbite. I believe that's what his name was. Sorry, it's been a while. But yeah, so Frostbite is the number 1 hero, and I'll put up the kind of stats as well as his quirk. So, his last name being Midoriya, he is the grandfather or the great grandfather of Izuku or Deku in the main story. So yeah, so Apollo's looking at this and he's questioning, what's this about? It must be important if the number 1 hero is there. So as this is happening, the reporter would ask the number 1 hero, Frostbite, what he plans to do at this rally and what's the point of it. So when Frostbite basically says that he's here to show that there's no difference between quirk and quirkless people and quirk users. So he begins to kind of make his point across. So he begins with saying, well, we're both just humans, right? Quirks are a very new concept to people, and a lot of people don't really know the inner workings of a quirk, and we don't really know much about quirks in general. So it is, reasonable for people to be skeptical, but we're here to show the people that there's no reason to be scared of quirk users. At the end of the day, we're just normal people just trying to live our lives just like everyone else. And I hope with this kind of protest, you guys can actually see that. And I'm not just saying this as, the number 1 hero, but I'm saying this as a person to a person, right? A heart to heart, if you will. And as he's talking about this to the reporter, this is when a couple of, schoolboys actually walk by on their way to school, and they actually throw rocks at this rally, and particularly at the number 1 hero being Frostbite. So Frostbite doesn't really flinch at all and actually takes the hits, not really showing any damage. because these were around, I would say, middle schoolers that would have thrown the rocks at Frostbite. And the reporter would say, "Are you okay, Frostbite? Do you need any, medical attention?" Since these were they were medium-sized rocks, big enough, smaller than a baseball, but still large enough to do some impact. And this is where Frostbite would be like, "No, it's fine." And then this is when the reporter would say, "Are you going to do anything about it?" And this is where Frostbite as a character, he's very quiet and reserved somewhat, but he is very kind. And this kind of personality actually does bring up his own kind of cult of personality, similar to All Might, but in like the kind of polar opposite, I guess, because All Might is very, lively and eccentric and out there, while Frostbite is very reserved, quiet, but people really enjoy his kind of down-to-earth style, and that's why he is the number one hero, not just because he's the strongest, but also because he's the most popular, because of this kind of unique kind of personality to him. So he basically tells the reporter that, "No, I'm not going to do anything to them. They're just kids, and a lot of kids do dumb things when they're small, right? And eventually they'll regret what they did today, and they'll find out that we were just normal people just trying to live our lives, like I said before." And I think it has to do with them not really making that connection at this point in time, but eventually they will. So it's not really my place to do that. And they're just, like I said before, they're just kids, and they don't really understand what they're doing. So that's where it kind of ended off, and this is where Apollo would finish eating his breakfast and basically turning off the TV to go to school. He's thinking about this as he walks to school, like, wow, he thinks that Frostbite was very cool to keep calm in that kind of situation where people would blatantly antagonize you, and he thinks about how he wants to be someone like Frostbite, where things like that wouldn't bother him, because I think a lot of people in that situation would have. So eventually this is when Apollo would get to school, and as he's going to school, he's reading this book, and this book is actually a manual, and this is actually the school manual. The reason why he's actually reading this is that he wants to learn how the fights actually go in school, right? Because the way that the system works, where you have to challenge a person to get into the next class above you, he's learning everything he could do to kind of exploit the rules. And basically what the rules are for fighting, for getting into different classes, is that there isn't really much rules to it. The main rule is that you can't really kill people, right? That's an obvious one, as well as the fight has to be something where there could not be outsiders who injure your opponent in any way. So that means like physically injure. So these rules were blatantly vague on purpose, and that'll be soon revealed later on. So he continues to walk through the halls reading this manual, and as he gets there, he gets into his classroom, and this is where he meets the rest of his class, as well as the teacher, Pit Sensei. So Pit Sensei would ask him what he's doing, and he would say, "Oh, I'm reading the manual to see any advantage I could have during the fights." He's like, "Oh." Like, at this point, Pit Sensei sees a lot of potential in Apollo, because Apollo really wants to become someone great. He wants to try his best, and he's been doing that, especially with the fact that he created the power leveling club. So eventually, when everyone would get there, this is where Pit Sensei would tell Apollo to put it away, and this is where he would begin to listen. So he would start talking to class. He would start with, "All right, class, we all know that you guys are quirk users. There are very few quirkless people at our school, but you are D, or class E, And that means you are the weakest, right? At least on paper. So that means you need to work on your quirk. But first, before we work on anything on your quirk, we need to know the limits and what your quirk can actually do. So we need to understand your quirk more. We live in a time where quirks are new, so we don't have much research. So we need to do a one-on-one test with everyone. So we know what your quirk is. So get into your PE uniforms and meet us outside. So as they do that, everyone would get into their kind of PE uniform and meet Pit Sensei outside. So this is where everyone would basically line up, and he would tell the class, all right, can we get a volunteer? And this is where Jack Slash, with his quirk chain kicks or kick chains, where he's able to generate chains from his legs. And he would bring him up in front of the class, and he would ask Jack basically if he has ever, or I believe his name is Jake, not Jack. So he asked Jake whether or not he's ever tested how far his chains can go. And he would say no. And he would continue asking him questions. He would say, well, have you tried, have you seen how many chains you could create at once? And again, Jack would say no, or Jake would say no. And he would say, or Pit would continue questioning, saying, well, have you tried making chains from other parts of your body? And this is where Jake would actually say yes, and he was only able to get through his legs. And this is where Pit says, all right, so you see what I'm doing here, class? I'm asking questions that maybe you haven't thought of because you maybe have not thought of maxing out your quirk. And he would tell the rest of the class to think about what you can do. And this is where he would break them up and to, and have them go to different parts of the field to basically test out their quirks. He would go to each of these students to basically ask them a few questions. So let's go down the list. So Kato Zerashi, with his quirk Shadow, where he's able to turn into one and teleport to nearby shadows. And he would ask him, like, do you know the limits on how long you could become a shadow? And he would say no, because he's only used it a few times, or he's only used it in short bursts. So he would tell him to kind of concentrate on doing that, and also try to find what your maximum reach is with the teleportation. Next, he would go to Lupin and his quirk Radiation. So he's able to create, microwaves that would melt low density objects. So he asks, have you ever tried focusing it or even maximizing its beam or its spread? And he would say yes, but not to the focusing part. So he would try to do that and try to see whether or not he can extend the range or even make the output a lot more. Next, he would go to Yato or Yutu Kazuya with his quirk Gas Breath. Again, he would say, well, have you tried, I guess in this one, it's kind of hard to do his quirk. So he would try to say, have you tried to make your quirk more potent, I guess, with putting more gas into the air? And what he would focus on is to breathe as much or breathe out as much, increase his lung capacity, I guess, to maximize his quirk. So after that, he would go to Hana Banamoro and her quirk, we have someone above her, that being Jacqueline, and her quirk, or his quirk Slip, and how he's able to make things slip. So he would tell, Pit would ask him, try to extend the range, and also try to see how slippery you could make something, and how he could use that in, tactical ways. So that's his kind of way that he's trying to up his quirk. Next person would be Hana Mamori, and her quirk Bakugan, where she's able to have 360 degrees as well as seeing these kind of energy spots on people. And if she gets all 150, I believe, then it basically nullifies your quirk for a bit. And for each one she hits, it basically weakens her quirk. So what he would tell her is to try to see how fast she can activate all 50 and if the kind of pattern that she does matter or not. So she would have to pair her up with another teacher, probably some of the kind of custodians or someone that's in the kind of combat course, because there are multiple teachers per class. So yeah. Next we would have Ida, or Marari Ida, and her quirk, or his quirk, Future Vision, and he would basically tell him to see how far the range is for people and to see how far she could go into the future or see into the future. Next we would have Derek Allows Fed, and what he would tell him, because for some particular reason that I'll go into later, Derek does not really want to train his quirk and refuses to. And this kind of gets Pit kind of mad and tells him that why go to the school if you're not going to even try. And Pit says, I still want to be a hero, I just don't want to be anywhere near the top. And this is where Pit would basically say that's not going to help anyone. You got to go for the best so you could do your best and get, help as many people as possible. And Derek doesn't really listen to this. And because of how Pit is realizing that he's not listening, he just goes to the next person. And that being Ray and his quirk, Hypnosis. So he basically tells him to try to see how his hypnosis works. Try to find multiple ways of using it and how long he could use it. So that's basically giving him the kind of questions to ask himself. Next we have Hiro Hikari and his quirk, Light Control. So he would ask him, do you know the max amount of light that you could put out? And he would say, well, I try to do that during the kind of fights, the free-for-all fights for the representation or representative. And people be like, okay, well, try to boost the amount of light you can contain or shoot, and try to do things like focus beams or even reflect light off of other objects. You might be better off pairing with someone that could actually take your hits, like Athena. So we would get to Iburi, Nani, or not Nani, Nahi, and his quirk, Drill Bits. He would tell him about how long he could keep his. He would ask him, like, how long can you keep your hands as drill bits? He wouldn't know, so he would ask him to try to keep it as long as he could during the class, as well as try to dig as long as he could. So dig around so he could get some exercise within his kind of drill bits and make him more durable by the amounts of digging. The more digging he would do. So we would get to you, and this is where he would ask him his quirk, that being origami, or he would ask him the amount of things he could control at once, and you would not know because he's never really tried to go as many as he could. Then he would ask him to look up more different ways of using origami so that he could open or make his arsenal a lot larger. And next we have Kuri Yamado and his quirk, Fortification. It's a hardening quirk kind of, but it could also transfer to other people. So he asks him how many things or how many objects and people can you enhance at once? What's your limit? Again, he would not know. So he would tell him to do as many as possible, as well as making those fortifications hard as possible. So he would go to the next person, that being Ben Beta and his quirk, Copycat. He does. We already know the limit to his quirk, that being around 10 minutes, but not being able to copy other people's quirks. So he would tell him to try to extend his range, or not range, but his ability timer. So he would try, or even then, try to constantly change between people and to do that. So next we have Athena Hayes with her quirk Helping Hands. We do know some of the kind of limits to her quirk, that being she can only boost around 5 people and it drains her stamina. It's only a 50% boost to a person, and she's able to absorb light as well as reflect it or turn light into darkness. So she this is what happens. So Pit Sensei would tell Athena to basically work on her stamina, since that's going to be the best way she could do to help people. So he orders her to kind of meditate in the sun to absorb as much sunlight as she can, because even though it's daylight, it's kind of hard for her to absorb the sunlight because it's not focused, as well as it being very spread out and not like a focus beam like someone's like Hero or anything like that. So next we will get to Ryu Mead and his quirk Freeze. So I believe the timer for his kind of freeze ability was around 8 minutes, and if you don't remember, his freeze ability basically makes it where he triples the gravity of someone. So he would tell Ryu to basically triple the weight of multiple things at once, as well as trying to increase your endurance so you could make the timer longer. Next we will get to Van Grun and his quirk ability, or his quirk agility. So he would basically tell him to be in this kind of agility form as long as possible and try to make him like run around and basically exercise his body so that he could have more power with it. Next we have Sid Meier and his quirk Water Control. So again, he would tell him to try to control as much water as possible, as well as trying to focus more on how much or how the precise the water would be. Next we would have James Poip with his quirk Stretch. With this, he would tell him to stretch as far as he can, as well as work on some physical strength to kind of help with that. Next we finally get to the last person, and that being Apollo. So this is where Pit Sensei kind of shows kind of favoritism to, I guess you wouldn't call it favoritism, but he would tell Apollo, he would ask him more intricate questions because of how his quirk works. So he would tell Apollo this: hey, Apollo, have you tried making things that are not really physical? And this is where Apollo would be like, what do you mean? Well, have you tried flames? You had to have made flames at one point, right? As tattoos, you were a kid and you're able to make tattoos. There's no way you wouldn't have done that. So Apollo would be like, yeah, but I never tried to manifest those, and I never really thought of doing that. I've only got the idea of manifesting my powers a little bit later on. So this is where Pit would be like, well, try to manifest some flames right now. So this is where Apollo would try to, what would happen is that he would make a design on his arm, that of flames, and he would try to make them physical, right? And as he's like thinking, he's basically has his eyes closed as he's thinking of trying to imagine the kind of detail on the tattoo, as well as trying to make it physical. And as this is happening, Pit Sensei actually sees the kind of tattoo glowing, but it's not fully manifestation, or it's not fully manifesting at this point. And as this is happening, Apollo just kind of starts kind of sweating as he's doing this, and eventually kind of stops, and he's kind of winded from trying to do this. And Pit Sensei's like, that's good, now try to do it again. And Apollo's like, again? Like, I barely was able to do that, and you want me to do it again? He's like, yes, this is how you grow as a person, this is how you grow as a hero. You need to test your limits and go past that. That's why I see a lot of promise in you. You understand that. That's why you made the power leveling club, right? You did that so you could, go past your limits. You want to be the best. So this is how you start. You start with one step. You got to ask yourself questions that you haven't asked before and actually try to answer them. and not just be comfortable in what you can do, but try to do more. So this is where Apollo would just kind of sit down and try to keep on manifesting these kind of these flames over and over and over, until one point he actually is able to make a small flame through his finger. And he thinks about it, and as he's thinking like, wow, if I could do this, I think I could go to class 1A. I just gotta get more practice. And as he's thinking about this, he's so tired of trying. As he's doing this, he's kind of draining his stamina to making these really complex drawings. So he basically passes out. And yeah, this is where I'm gonna end the video. And the next part will go, I won't say it, but the next episode should be out sometime soon. You guys can tell me what, if you guys want an explanation video on the top 10 heroes and things like that. So with that being said, this is gonna be in the video. So yeah.